Have you ever noticed how the most important stories are often the quietest ones? The ones that don't get the flashy headlines? Well, today, we're going to talk about one of those. It's a story about a seemingly tiny transaction, a mere $7 million deal, that I believe pulls back the curtain on a massive shift happening in our world. A shift that connects the digital world of artificial intelligence to the very real, very physical world of precious metals. Welcome to the Bullion Signal Podcast. This is the place where we cut through the noise to focus on the signals, the critical events in macroeconomics and precious metals that can help you protect and grow your wealth. If you find this kind of analysis valuable, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Now let's get into the real story of why one of the world's biggest tech companies just made a desperate move to secure a small silver mine.
So, the event itself seems almost mundane. In late 2025, Samsung, a name we all know, made a move. But it wasn't for a flashy startup or a new software company. They effectively bought the entire output of a silver mine. Now, for a company of their size, the dollar amount is pocket change. But the move itself, well, the move is everything. It's a signal flare. It tells us that something is happening behind the scenes. Something that has the top executives at one of the world's most advanced companies very, very concerned. And the question we have to ask is, why? Let's start by looking at the deal itself, because the details here are incredibly revealing. We're talking about $7 million to lock up 100% of a single mine's output in Mexico. Again, the money isn't the story, it's the structure of the deal. This wasn't an investment in the mining company's stock, hoping for a return. This was a direct physical intervention into the supply chain. Okay, so let's break this down. On one side, you have Samsung C&T, the trading and construction arm of the Samsung empire. On the other, a small Canadian junior miner called Silvertorm Mining. Samsung gave them $7 million up front. In return, Samsung gets every single ounce of silver that comes out of their La Parilla mine for the next 2 years. This is called a prepaid offtake agreement. In simple terms, Samsung paid in advance to guarantee they get the physical metal. They're not playing the paper market, they are securing actual physical silver. This is a move you make when you're not worried about the price of a commodity, but its availability. So that brings us to the core of the issue. Why this sudden, desperate need for physical silver? The answer lies in a dirty little secret of the AI revolution. We tend to think of AI as something that exists in the cloud. It's abstract, it's code. But the physical reality is that AI is one of the most power-hungry, heat-intensive technologies humanity has ever created. And that creates a massive engineering problem. I really want you to visualize this for a moment. Take one of the top-of-the-line AI chips for NVIDIA or AMD. It's smaller than your phone, but when it's running at full tilt, it generates over 1,000 watts of waste heat. That is the thermal equivalent of holding 10 old-fashioned 100-watt incandescent light bulbs that kind of get too hot to touch right in the palm of your hand. If you can't get that heat away from the chip, and I mean instantly, the chip destroys itself. It's not a performance issue, it's a survival issue for the hardware. And this leads us to a fundamental law of physics, thermal conductivity. It's a fancy term for a simple idea. How good is the material at moving heat from a hot place to a cold place? You can think of it as a pipe for heat. The bigger the pipe, the more heat you can move away from that critical AI chip, and the faster you can run your calculations. For AI, you don't just need a good pipe, you need the best one nature has to offer. And this is where it all comes together. When you look at the raw data for all the elements, nothing, and I mean nothing, conducts heat better than silver. The numbers are right there. Silver is the king at 429 units. Copper, which is what we use for most electronics, is a close second at 401. But in the world of high-performance AI, that small gap is a canyon. That difference is what allows the chip to run at its peak potential instead of throttling back or melting down. Gold is a distant third. For the absolute cutting edge, silver isn't a choice, it's a requirement. This is the key takeaway. For what these companies are trying to achieve, there is no plan B. The engineers have tried everything. They've looked at exotic alloys, synthetic materials, but nothing comes close to the performance of pure, simple silver. It is a unique gift of physics. So when you're building a multi-billion-dollar AI data center, your entire investment hinges on this one single element. There's no substitute.
So we have an inescapable law of physics, but that's just one side of the equation. Now we have to look at the economics, and this is where the physics problem transforms into a full-blown supply crisis. When you have a technology with exponential demand, like AI, that absolutely depends on a physically scarce resource, you get some very, very scary math.
The first major problem is this. The world's annual silver supply is already spoken for. For years, the market has been tight. Massive industries like solar panels and consumer electronics are already consuming huge amounts. Add an investment in jewelry demand, and there is basically no slack in the system. The world is using every ounce of silver it produces, and then some. There aren't vast warehouses of surplus silver just waiting for a new buyer to show up. Now, into this already tight market, let's inject the AI demand. The numbers are just staggering. In the year 2026 alone, forecasters expect the deployment of 10 million new servers specifically for AI applications. 10 million. This isn't a gradual increase. It's a tidal wave of new demand. And those 10 million servers are projected to require around 24 million ounces of silver, just for 1 year's worth of new AI hardware. You're talking about a massive new buyer entering a store where the shelves are already bare. You can see why a company like Samsung would feel the urgent need to cut to the front of the line and secure its own private supply. The obvious question is, well, why don't we just mine more silver? And the answer is that it is incredibly difficult. See, over 70% of the world's silver isn't mined from primary silver mines. It's a byproduct of mining for other industrial metals like lead, zinc, and copper. You can't just decide to produce more silver. You have to produce more of those other metals, whether the world needs them or not. Add to that the fact that recycling is difficult and expensive, there are no substitutes, and global stockpiles have been in deficit for 5 straight years. You have a recipe for a historic supply squeeze. So we have a physics problem and a supply problem, creating the perfect storm. But there was one more factor, the one that turned this from a long-term concern into a 5-alarm fire. And that factor is geopolitics. This is what forced Samsung to act, and to act immediately. You have to look at this timeline. It tells the entire story. On October 9th, China, which doesn't mine the most silver but dominates the refining process, threatens to put strict export controls on critical minerals. The very next day, not a week later, not a month later, but the very next day, October 10th, Samsung signs the deal for the Mexican mine. This is not a coincidence. This is cause and effect. It was a strategic response to a direct threat from a geopolitical rival that could have crippled their entire AI and semiconductor business overnight. What this move represents is a complete rejection of the old way of doing business. The old model, the one we've lived with for 30 years, was about globalization and just-in-time delivery. It was efficient, but it was fragile. It relied on potentially hostile middlemen and was vulnerable to geopolitical shocks. The new model, the one Samsung is building, is about security and resilience. It's about bringing supply chains closer to home, in this case Mexico, and having full control from the mine all the way to the factory. It's a just-in-case strategy. So let's zoom out. What does this $7 million deal really mean for all of us? It means we are entering a new era. This isn't just a story about silver or about Samsung. It's a story about the dawn of a new resource war, where the battles of the 21st century will be fought over the physical elements that power our technology. This move signals a profound shift. The era of cheap, reliable global supply chains is over. For strategic industries, vertical integration, owning your supply chain, is becoming the only way to survive. Critical minerals are no longer just commodities. They are strategic weapons being wielded by nations. And in the coming AI age, the winners and losers will not be determined by who has the best algorithm, but by who has secured the physical resources needed to build the hardware.
And that brings us to the core truth of this whole story. This was never a financial investment for Samsung. They weren't trying to make a few $1,000,000 on the price of silver. This was an insurance policy, a $7 million insurance policy to protect a multi-billion-dollar AI business from grinding to a halt because they couldn't get their hands on a few ounces of a specific metal. They invested to secure survival. Samsung saw the writing on the wall. They understood the physics, they saw the supply crunch coming, and they reacted to the geopolitical threat. They made their move. They secured their supply of silver. But Samsung is just one player in a global race. Every major tech company, and indeed every major nation, is sprinting towards an AI-powered future. A future that is fundamentally dependent on this one irreplaceable metal. And that leaves us with a very sobering question to think about. Samsung is prepared. Who else is? Thank you for joining me on the Bullion Signal Podcast. If you found this breakdown insightful, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more analysis that goes beyond the headlines. And as a final reminder, please remember that the content discussed here is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not and should not be construed as financial or investment advice. You should always conduct your own research and consult with a qualified professional before making any investment decisions. You are solely responsible for the choices you make. We'll see you in the next one.